Boom, this is Dustin Baker on VikesNow, the Thursday edition. Before I forget, I will be off on Friday and Saturday, heading to Des Moines with my wife to see Hamilton. That is on our agenda. I'll be back Sunday night to record. So if you care or watch this religiously, I won't be on the video part for the next 2 days. But we're going to talk today about Kevin O'Connell, first-year head coaches, and their relationship to Vikings history. And we're going to do it for two reasons. Because I wanted to get on the record the precedent for how Vikings coaches usually do. It's a curious topic. I find it interesting. I know since you watch a show like this that gets in the weeds of Vikings history and Viking stuff, you'll find it interesting too. And then plus, if things, for whatever reason, go pear-shaped, they're shitty, and the Vikings don't do well, I want to quell this is the worst coach we've ever seen. Because as you're about to find out, that's probably false. Right out of the gate, we're going to talk about the Super Bowl precedent of first-year head coaches, regardless of the Vikings. Because, as you know, the Vikings haven't won a Super Bowl. Been there 4 times, no cigar. The precedent. In the Super Bowl era, since 1966, 5 coaches have gotten to the Super Bowl. And I will go through them. Red Miller for the Broncos in 1977 took Denver to the Super Bowl. They lost to the Cowboys. Bill Callahan, Dirty Bill, from the Raiders, then Oakland Raiders in 2002, got to the Super Bowl against Brad Johnson, played for this team, and they lost in, 48-22, some sort of shootout when I was just graduating high school. And then Jim Caldwell got to the Super Bowl with the Colts. He was gift-wrapped, the Colts franchise, tailor-made by Tony Dungy, in a game the Vikings should have played in. And Drew Brees got his one and only ring against first-year head coach Jim Caldwell. Those are the losers. That's 3 Super Bowl appearances by those men. Conversely, 2 other guys won the Super Bowl in their first year. One is 1970, and that was Don McCafferty for the Baltimore Colts, team led by Johnny Unitas. They knocked off the Cowboys in the Super Bowl. And another dynastic present to George Seifert in 1989. They disemboweled the Broncos in that Super Bowl 55-10. Bill Walsh stepped away and says, "Here you go, bro," to Seifert. And he had Joe Montana, Jerry Rice, Ronnie Lott, Charles Haley, Roger Craig, John Taylor. I almost said John Tyler from my political roots in the presidency. But yeah, so 2 Super Bowls have been won by first-year head coaches. On the whole, 5 dudes have got there. That means 1.8% of all coaches in the Super Bowl era get to the Super Bowl in their first year. 1.8%. It's like 0.7% for the ones that actually win. So it is a gauntlet that will have to be run if the Vikings want to sniff a Super Bowl. And I encourage you to watch on YouTube today, tomorrow, or whenever, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah's interview with Mike Florio on NBC Sports' PFT page. He compares the Vikings to the 2022 Celtics. Kwesi, this is a tangent, or I'm digressing here. He said that just like Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown were in the trade rumor mill 4 months ago, which is accurate when things weren't going peachy for the Celtics, there was a sentiment, enthusiasm to perhaps trade those guys. Nevertheless, the Celtics did not. Bada bing, they're about to potentially, sorry Heat fan, reach the finals. And so what Kwesi said is that's what we did with this offseason. We looked at the roster while you and your neighbor and your dog wanted Kirk Cousins traded. Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah looked at the roster and said, let's make improvements, just like the Celtics did. Interesting stuff. He and Florio talked for about 25 minutes. A lot of it's backdrop, backstory, bio from Kwesi, but what's not to love about that? So we got the Super Bowl precedent out of the way. Vikings probably aren't going to or winning a Super Bowl if you believe in how the league has worked up to this point. The first-year history of Vikings coaches doesn't get much better. I'm going to try to do this from memory, so bear with me. 1961, Norm Van Brocklin. The Vikings went 3-11. Expansion team, we get it. Understandable. 1967, Bud Grant went 3-8-3. 3 juicy ties in that season, and wasn't a very good campaign. We all know that Bud would bust out shortly thereafter. 1984, the Les Steckel year, 3-13. Yuck. I was 1 year old when he coached, so therefore don't remember it, but I always hear the horror stories about Les Steckel. Bud Grant came back for 1985. I don't consider him a first-year coach. 1986 was Jerry Burns, 9-7. This team unbelievably had the league's fourth best offense per point scored, fifth best defense per points allowed. Didn't get to the playoffs. It was Tommy Kramer, Darren Nelson, and the boys. Couldn't quite get it done. A strange statistical anomaly. Burns didn't last for too long, a couple years shorter than Zimmer. 1992, Dennis Green came to town, went 11-5 with Rich Gannon, Terry Allen, Chris Dolman, John Randall, Anthony Carter, and they got to the postseason. They faced the reigning Washington Commanders, the reigning Super Bowl champions, I should say, and got their asses kicked at the Metrodome, 24-7. But that was the only time in Vikings history that a first-year head coach whisked the team to the postseason. That's what we want O'Connell to do. It's only been done once. It doesn't get any better after Green. In 2002, a decade after Green was hired, Mike Tice took over, 6-10. That was the Randy ratio year. Not going to do it. Didn't cut it. Defense was atrocious. I'll get into that here when we talk about roster talent in about 2 minutes. 2002, that was Tice. Next is Childress, 2006, 6-10. The kick-ass offense wasn't very kick-ass now, was it, until Adrian got there. That season was, I've talked to Bryant McKinney about this a couple times on the other show that I have, that in my estimation, that was the only time in Vikings history in my life, since I became a fan, I should say, since 1996, where they went into the season, you knew they weren't going to the Super Bowl. That was the only time that a Vikings team just flat out didn't have a puncher's chance because they were getting a retread of Brad Johnson. Chester Taylor was the running back. It was a hodgepodge of wide receivers. No thanks. And first-year head coach. That was the only time I can remember thinking, all right, this is a rebuild season, even though it wasn't sold to us as a rebuild. But yeah, Childress, 6-10. After that flowed into Leslie Frazier, went 3-13 in 2011. And that brings us to Zimmer. I hope I didn't forget any. I don't think I forgot any. Zimmer, 7-9. And that season was fun because the defense got back to shape. At least I think it was 14th or 15th best that season. And it felt super refreshing compared to Frazier's defenses that were supposed to be good but never were. It's a defensive-minded coach, for God's sake. So consider this. You're getting O'Connell in 2022, the first offensive-minded head coach since Brad Childress. And it's arguable whether or not he moves the needle for your brain as offensive-minded or offense first. But yeah, that's why this offseason feels so unique, is that you've had a defense-first head coach since 2010. And that's a long time. Football years are really in any standard. All in all, those compiled first-year records by Vikings head coaches per win percentage means that the Kevin O'Connell Vikings, according to history, are likely to go 6-11, 7-10 if you're optimistic. If you just lasso all of the performance by all the Vikings past head coaches, it's not very peachy. So keep that in mind. Another thing that point out, I think Twitter helped me with this, is that the talent on this roster, at least with our goggles on right now, seems a lot better than what these other guys had in the first year. A case can be made that the 2002 offense with Mike Tice, the Randy ratio year, was a little more exciting, probably because of Moss nostalgia looking back now and how we put Culpepper on this cloud where he's untouchable in terms of how talented he was. But that team, the offense was there to an extent. Michael Bennett was getting started. Kelly Campbell, Byron Chamberlain were on that team. But the defense, for the love of God. Do you remember that season? The defense, the best players on the defense were Corey Chavis, Chris Hovan, and Lance Johnstone. And Johnstone led the team with like 7 sacks. They had Greg Beekert in the middle, and the cornerbacks, Brian Williams. I think Willie Offord was on that team. And the 2002 team in general, I'll hear a case that it was more talented, probably because Randy Moss was there at age, 26, 27. I get it. But the defense was so, on paper, probably the worst depth chart defensively you could ever dream of for a Vikings roster. So I'm not sure that I buy the 2002 team had more talent, which would mean that the 2022 team has the talent that other first-year head coaches did not. You have to also consider that when a lot of these guys, Van Brocklin, Bud Grant, Steckel, they played in an era where I swear to God, teams went into seasons with like rosters and they're like, yeah, they're good enough, that'll work. It was a different era for a long time that it seems like teams go into a season with an organically drafted roster and say, this is the best that we got, and it'll work. Consider like right now we have an incessant thirst for finding a franchise quarterback. Not just the Vikings, every team. That is the denominator, so to speak, for prosperity. Do you have a franchise quarterback or don't you? And then you spend hours, days, weeks debating whether or not Kirk Cousins is that. But in yesteryear, some of the quarterbacks that were trotted out, it was unbelievable. Like Mike Tomczak, trotted out twice in the late 80s, early 90s. Different teams with the Chicago Bears and Pittsburgh Steelers in separate seasons, of course. They said, this is going to work. This is good enough. We got Mike Tomczak. And that would be akin to this brand of Vikings with this roster signing Brett Hundley or Nick Mullins and being content with it. So it's a different age, especially with free agency, and I think just the media coverage of the event, that gone are the days where you can roll into a season with an asshole quarterback and some half-measured roster, unless, you're like a rebuild team. Like the Texans roster isn't very good right now. And let's see who else. Falcons isn't roster top to bottom, not very good. For the most part, though, teams going in NFL seasons don't have intentionally crummy rosters like some of these Vikings teams in years past did. So that's some nuance. That's some context that O'Connell can shoot for the stars, more easily because he's got a roster, at least in our opinions, that looks pretty good. On the whole, though, O'Connell will have to shatter some precedent. He will have to slap in the face how the Vikings usually perform with first-year head coaches. I hope that we're not sitting here a year from now or 10 months from now doing a show saying, well, yeah, the Vikings went 7-10. What'd you expect? Because I will say that, that's what this history told us. That's what has happened in the past, and therefore is a somewhat reasonable indicator of the future. So yeah, if O'Connell does anything that is a playoff appearance, it will be better than a lot of other guys, not named Dennis Green, all of the other guys. So there's almost a pedestal of Green, who the only guy in team history to do it. Went 11-5, got to the playoffs, got smoked by the Commanders. So keep that in mind. Not telling you to lower your expectations. I'm not trying to lower the bar here at all. I'm trying to provide reality of how it usually goes. I think that's the context that's needed. And also, it's kind of a disclaimer. Oh, this is going to be tricky to sell to you guys, but I'll do my damnedest. It's also a disclaimer that if indeed this version of Vikings with all these players, if they go something, again, like 8-9, 9-8, 10-7, 6-11, you don't have to run the head coach out of town. Right now, we are in a bona fide honeymoon with both the general manager and the head coach, where the worst thing they can do is trade with the Packers and Lions, or some people's estimation, the worst thing they could do is re-up with Kirk Cousins. But it takes a couple days, and we get over it. We go sign Zadarius Smith, and we're back in it to win it. I don't know how exactly these Vikings will perform. I think I'm going to end up picking them 11-6, 10-7. Hopefully it's not stupid that I do that. But you don't need to run the coach out of town if this isn't a playoff team right away. I know the roster looks that way, but I would preach patience in the event that you get another product that's similar to 9-8. That would also effectuate change. Another 9-8 season or anything that's playoffs lists, I believe, will show Kirk Cousins the door. I think he's got one shot here, and it's with a offense-first coach, which he hasn't had with the Vikings. But yeah, this is a speech I give about rookies in general, and especially rookie quarterbacks, that in year one, if they're not the next big thing, if they don't look like Brock Lesnar in 2002 in the WWE, you don't have to shit on them. You don't have to cry. You don't have to call for their termination. Sometimes coaches and often players take time to mature and develop. So that's my little disclaimer. Now, all that said, I don't think the Vikings are going to be 6-11, 7-10. as history would indicate for a first-year coach. But I can appreciate the historical context of how it's happened in the past. I think all in all, when I get there, and I'm going to milk it all the way to the summer before I make a prediction, I'm feeling 10-7, 11-6, and hopefully the Packers take a little step back so they're in that same boat and there can be a division in the Vikings' future. Overall, this is an uphill battle if you appreciate Vikings history, because Dennis Green was the only guy to lead the team to the postseason. And bless Jerry Burns' heart for effectuating a team that was statistically sound that only went 9-7. I will be back on Sunday with a Vikings topic and Skol, baby.